Good afternoon. On behalf of the New York Wine and Grape Foundation, we welcome you to New York Wines Online, the World of Wines within New York with Carlo DeVito. While we wait for everyone to get logged in, we would like to review a few logistical details. If you find yourself with streaming issues, please limit other internet users in your office or household. You may need to close all other open browsers, or you may also find it helpful to log out and log back in with Firefox or Chrome. We have two forms of communication for today's webinar, the chat and the Q&A sections. The chat section is an informal way for you to communicate with other attendees. Please be sure to select all panelists and attendees in the drop-down To field, as it can default to panelists only. Additionally, we have the Q&A section. This is a way for you to ask questions of our on-screen panelists. Please be sure to enter any questions for the panelists into the separate Q&A section. We will do our best to get to all of your questions at the end of the session. Today's webinar is being recorded and streamed to Facebook Live and will be available to all attendees after the webinar. To begin today's webinar, I would like to introduce you to Carlo DeVito. Carlo is a lifelong publishing executive with more than 20 years of experience. He has written more than 20 books and is the editor of East Coast Winery's blog, which has more than 1.3 million individual page views and has published more than half a dozen books on wine, beers, and spirits, including East Coast Winery's Big Whiskey, the New Single Malt Whiskey, the Wine Notebook, and many others. He is also the producer and host of The Great American Winery Stroopwafel. Carlo, I'll hand the mic to you.
Thank you so much. Welcome everybody to the world of wines within New York. There's a lot of fun stuff that we're going to be tasting today. A lot of really good wines and some very different wines that are different from each other. I'm going to introduce our group of panelists and then we'll start tasting right after that. Today we have 5 very different winemakers. We have Edward Miller from Glenora Cellars, who will be sharing with us the Glenora 2014 Brut. There's Russell Hearn, owner and winemaker of Suhru Wines, and he'll be pouring his 2019 Cabernet Franc. There is the Fulkerson Winery owner and GM, Stephen Fulkerson. He'll be pouring his Riesling Tequila barrel finish. And winemaker Sue Passmore from Buttonwood. She'll be pouring a Riesling for us. And of course, Cindy West Chamberlain, owner and winemaker at Black Willow, who will be sharing with us her 2019 Classic Diamonds. We've got some really fabulous wines today. One of the things that I wanted to talk about before we pop the first bottle is talking about some of the diversity that happens within the various regions. And some of them have just tremendous history. Certainly in the Hudson Valley alone, you have the first winery, the first farm winery, and the first farm brewery, the first farm cidery, all in New York State. We're all spawned out of the Hudson Valley. And of course, the Hudson Valley has the oldest operating winery in America and the oldest continually farmed vineyard in America. So New York State has a lot of winemaking history and tradition. You can look at Long Island, which had the William Prince Gardens, which were the first great botanical gardens here in the United States. And so Long Island has a long, long tradition of farming and botany. And of course, their wine making goes back to the 1970s. And there's lots of great things going on there. The Finger Lakes are historic. Certainly we have Cornell there, one of the great enology programs on the East Coast. And we have numerous wineries of all stripes and sizes. Certainly Riesling is the king in the Finger Lakes, but there's a lot more that goes on in the Finger Lakes than just Riesling. So there's a lot of diversity there as well. And then you've got Western New York, which is possibly one of the largest grape growing regions in the state, out by the Niagara Escarpment and Lake Erie, where a lot of grapes are grown, and there's a real burgeoning wine cultured there as well. And of course, we have the Upper Hudson Valley and the Champlain Valley as well. New York has this wide geography, and they're producing different wines in each one of those regions. And we'll have a lot of fun tasting what's coming out of there. So I think without ado, we're going to go on to the first wine, which is our Glenora Brute 2014. And Edward, why don't you join us? I'm going to pop this bad boy open right here online, right here live.
All right, hello everyone.
Wow, great. And then we started off with a bang. So this Glenora Wine Cellars Brut is fantastic. It's a 2014 vintage, largely Pinot Noir with lots of Chardonnay in there, sort of a classic version. And Edward, if you could tell us more about it.
Oh, certainly. So I have to say I'm a bit of an imposter here because I just took over for the former winemaker as of June of this year. So unfortunately, I can't take credit for this wine. The former winemaker for Glenora, Steve DiFrancesco, had been making sparkling wine for probably 30 years in the Finger Lakes. So a lot of experience and really quite a master at sparkling wine in this region. As Carlo mentioned, it is mostly Pinot Noir. That's 79% Pinot Noir. That was grown on the west side of Seneca Lake at a farm called Glenora Farms, which is not owned by Glenora Wine Cellars, but right next door. Then we have about 10% of Glenora Farm Chardonnay, also from the west side of the lake, and then 11% Chardonnay from the east side of Seneca Lake, from Chateau Lafayette Renault. So yeah, I mean, this sparkling wine it's pretty delightful. I guess let me first give you just a little bit more of the history of it. The pick dates for the grapes were that kind of end of September, early October, which seems to be pretty typical. Although possibly even a little bit later than some years. I think the 2014 vintage, and somebody who was here for the 2014 vintage will have to fill in some more details. But from what Steve told me, it was pretty average vintage, nothing really out of the ordinary that he could remember. So the grapes came in at really a perfect sugar level, kind of between 18, 19 bricks, and between 9 to 10 grams per liter of acidity, kind of the 3.2 pH as well. So really nice chemistry for making sparkling wine. The base wine was fermented nice and slowly. I should mention we do press cuts on this sparkling wine as well. So only about 120 gallons per ton goes towards our sparkling program.
Wow.
And that's to really make sure that we don't pick up any bitterness, any phenolics from the grape skins by pressing them too hard. And we don't jack up our pH by tumbling the grapes and extracting more potassium from that. The lots were fermented separately, blended in, it looks like probably early March of the following year in 2015.
Okay.
And then it was put to tirage in August of 2015. And then we are actually kind of disgorging this as we go. So we disgorged some of it earlier on this year, and we're disgorging more periodically. So it's had 6 and going on 7 years of lees contact time.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's how you get that mouthfeel that I think is coming across, right? Anybody want to comment on the wine? Because I think it's really lovely. There's big mouthfeel to it. Lovely bottles. You got a little bit of lemon on there as well. I think it's coming up really nicely.
Yeah, I agree.
Rich mouthy. I really like it.
Yeah, thank you. As I said, I wish I could take credit, but yeah, absolutely. I guess some of that kind of lemon curd almost on the mouthfeel, which I think comes from that extended lees contact time, kind of backed by that bracing acidity.
Well, welcome. We are big fans of Steve, but welcome to, or welcome back, I should say, to New York Wine.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I'm thrilled to be back here. I've had an opportunity to choose where I wanted to work at the end of last year, and I decided to come back to the Finger Lakes because I think it has a really amazing potential and future ahead of it.
So could you tell us a little bit, I read your biography. It's a fascinating biography. Could you, oh, can you believe that? Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your journey to the Finger Lakes?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I discovered wine just after college. Actually, I didn't know that I was going to be bitten by the wine bug until I'd already graduated from university down in Virginia, and came up to the Finger Lakes just looking to try it out. I wasn't sure what direction I wanted to head in, but as soon as I started working at Lucas Vineyards in 2009, I was just caught by wine. I fell in love with it, and every day was I was excited to get up and go to work, which is a great problem to have. So I spent 2 vintages, about 2.5 years there, but then I knew I really needed to see the rest of the world of wine. So I left Lucas in the spring of 2012 and chased the harvest for a couple of years in Australia, New Zealand, California, before settling down in California for a number of years in Napa, Sonoma area. I ran a custom crush out there in Sonoma, and then worked for Mary Edwards Winery in Sebastopol for a few years as assistant winemaker. But I still knew that I was missing some critical vineyard experience because I'd come up through the cellar. And so my fiance and I, who was also in the wine industry, decided to take a jump, and we left our jobs in California and moved to Italy for 1.5 years to pursue a master's degree in viticulture and enology in Emilia-Romagna in Italy, which was a fantastic experience despite one of those years being 2020. Italy was rather hard hit, but we still were able to learn a lot. I was able to work in the vineyards in Tuscany and harvest in Chianti, and almost became conversational in Italian just before we had to leave when the country shut down again.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, but and that's what I meant when I said I had the opportunity to choose where I wanted to work. I was looking again in California after my experience in Italy. I was looking at different parts of America, and I have not stopped talking about the Finger Lakes since I left the Finger Lakes. So it seemed like a really natural fit for me to come back here, and I was lucky enough to see the opportunity at Glenora.
Very cool. Very cool. Anybody else want to say something about the wines? We had one question, which was, why do you use why do you press it the way you do? Is there any further information that you can offer? That was from
Sure. So in sparkling winemaking and champagne making, there is typically a number of press fractions. So you segment the juice that's coming out of the press based on quality parameters. So that kind of first, for us, 120 gallons per ton. So we normally get anywhere, depending on the year, 165 to 180 gallons per ton of grapes. And so that first free run and very, very light pressure gets us to that 120 gallon per ton mark. And that is going to be really the nicest juice. It is going to have the least phenolics. It's going to have spent the least time in contact with oxygen. So you might have the least oxidized notes to it. So we separate that because sparkling wine has a way of kind of showing those type of flaws more clearly even than, say, if we made a barrel fermented Chardonnay or something. So that's why we make these press cuts out of the pressing, because as you continue to add pressure to the grapes and shred the skins as you turn the press, then the chemistry of the wine actually starts to change, and it's preferable to take those first 120 gallons per ton for sparkling wine.
And I have to say, the more I'm tasting it, the more I'm getting some lovely apple and some pear flavors along with that lemon curd. Really pretty stuff. And there are some lovely photos of Glenora. You can always stay at Glenora, right? That's one of the big thrills for people who go to the Finger Lakes. You can actually stay at the inn at Glenora, which is a really fabulous way to spend your time in the Finger Lakes, because you'll be doing a lot of traveling.
Yep, no, and it's a great location. There's a restaurant on site. We've just finished this beautiful deck up off the tasting room that has that gorgeous view of the lake. So it's pretty nice place to be. I don't mind the view out my office window.
I just have one more question before you go. You've got a fairly large sparkling program at Glenora. Just wanted to let you elucidate on that just a minute.
Certainly. So it's been, well, absolutely a long-standing program. I was lucky enough to take part recently in a tasting where we tasted Glenora sparkling wines back to 1986. So there's a really deep history of making sparkling wine here. We make this Brut, we make a Blanc de Blanc, and we make a couple of sparkling wines, a sparkling rosé, a sparkling Riesling, and a non-vintage Brut, which is a blend as well. I love our Blanc de Blanc, but this Brut is always one of my favorites too. That Pinot Noir component just adds a really nice textural component for me. And a little bit of that more red, almost red fruit that you can pick up on the edges. This was, I believe, about 490 cases were put down to tirage for this wine.
Russell, did you have something to say?
After you finished. So I guess I was on mute before. I'm very impressed with sometimes sparkling wines on tirage for this long can get a little bit too heavy. A little bit too much sort of this bread toast kind of characteristic, but this one's still very, very elegant and light and refreshing, but still has plenty of complexity in the background. I'm impressed with that.
Yeah,
I think it's valuable also just to sort of point out that sparkling is such a fit for a cool climate that Finger Lakes and all of our areas are. The warmer climate regions of the world struggle with making good sparkling because of all the parameters that you just sort of spoke about, and I think this is sort of a perfect example of a very high quality one.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I agree with this region being excellent for sparkling wines. I think it could be one of the pillars to really build the reputation of the region upon. And yeah, I mean, out in California, you start harvesting sparkling wine at the end of July. Because you just lose that acidity and the sugar accumulates.
Yeah, it all just drops off, especially when you're chasing that, and the acidity is what you're looking for to keep it nice and bright, especially if you're going to do a longer hold on it, as in this classic Brut. Well, it's a perfect transition because now the next wine up is Suhru Cab Franc. Russell, that was a fabulous segue into that. This is a 82% Cab Franc. We've got 12% Syrah to go, 6% more Merlot. This is from the North Fork of Long Island. Russell is just a tremendous winemaker. He has been a fixture on Long Island for quite some time. Russell, can you tell us a little bit about your background before we go into the wine?
Well, originally from Australia. I got in the industry in Australia. My mother was in marketing for the second largest winery in Western Australia. So I sort of grew up around wine. It wasn't sort of this somewhat oddball idea. Spent several years working at Hortons Wines straight after school. Hortons was the largest winery in Western Australia. Had some great experiences there. They actually did a sparkling program. So that was my first exposure to that. During my time at Hortons, they encouraged us to do exchanges around the world in the off season in the Northern Hemisphere. So I worked in Burgundy in the early 80s. Worked in California, Alexander Valley Vineyard for a vintage. I worked a short period of time at Hunters in the Marlborough Sound area in New Zealand at the end of sort of Hortons harvest. So because obviously it's in the same hemisphere. So had some nice times there. I took a little break while I was there. Met my wife in New Zealand, who's American. Came to visit her for what was supposed to be a 6-week trip 35 years ago now. So still here, same girl. She's from Massachusetts. Not a lot of winemaking in Massachusetts. Spent a few years there. Spent a couple of years down in Virginia. Virginia's doing some nice things. Some nice wines down there. I realized it was the first time I'd never lived near the ocean in my life, and I realized that couldn't happen. So we moved. We were looking at Long Island, so moved here in 1990. Consulted for several wineries when I first came here. Got connected with the Pellegrinis when they were first starting their winery. I was lucky enough to get involved with the design of the winery and the selection of the equipment. I was the winemaker there for 20 vintages, nine full-time, 11 as a consultant. In 2000, I started Premium Wine Group, which is a custom crush facility on the North Fork of Long Island. And then that which is the goal is to allow space, equipment, and personnel for small producers to make their wines at one facility and not invest in the huge expense of capital.
Right.
And so in 2008, my wife and I decided, Susan, decided that we should do something together. And so we started Suhru Wines. So Suhru is Susan and Russell.
Right.
Our last name's Hearns. That's where the H's comes in. And we wholesaled for 6, 7, or 8 years, and then about 3 years ago, opened up a tasting room in addition to that. So, and been lucky enough that our oldest daughter, after college and Brooklyn and marketing and at Random House and Brooklyn Winery, decided to come back to the North Fork, and she's the GM of Suhru right now.
Fantastic, fantastic. So tell us a little bit about growing Cab Franc. Cab Franc is grown all over the state, but the North Fork is producing some lovely, lovely Cab Francs. If you haven't opened yours yet, folks, please do. The Suhru Cab Franc. It's really fabulous. It's got a lovely big nose to it. So Russell, tell us a little bit about your grape growing with the Cab Franc.
Yeah, Cab Franc obviously originally it's one of the 5 varieties from Bordeaux. It's purely as a blending variety there. Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot dominate, the acreage planted in Bordeaux. At Pellegrini, we decided to plant Cabernet Franc for that reason, to be a blender. 1994 was the second crop off the vineyard. 94 was a very, very good growing season. I was actually quite taken aback as to how good the Cabernet Franc was, even as 4-year-old vines. So we made our first varietal in 1994, and I've made probably 22, 23 since. It's well suited to our region. It's a mid ripening variety, so it ripens mid-October. So we have plenty of season still. The beauty of Cabernet Franc is that it doesn't grow very well in many areas around the world. So you don't see a lot of it as a varietal. But I think when it's grown in a spot that works nicely, and I think cool regions are that, it really exhibits some beautiful floral, aromatic, red berried, fruit characteristic, but much more elegant than some of the heavier red varieties. So I think it's a very food-friendly wine. It's well suited to our region. It's a little bit more fiddly in the vineyard to grow than, say, Merlot. Merlot is our most widely planted variety on Long Island. Cabernet Franc is the second most planted in reds,
Right.
And is continuing to be planted more and more.
When you're growing your Cab Franc, are you? I'm assuming you're doing some leaf pulling. Are you dropping fruit anytime during the course of the season? What are some of the other things that go into making a good Cabernet Franc from the North Fork?
Yeah, the variety itself wants to crop more than it should, so you have to really be on top of the cropping level, depending on the block that it's growing in. So early intervention from green harvesting, I think, is very, very important with Cabernet Franc. It seems like it's a variety that if it gets behind in the growing season, it doesn't catch up, where, say, Merlot does. So again, you have to be very, very on top of your, leaf pulling for sure for exposure. And as soon as the leaves are off, some correct amount of crop thinning. Not saying less is better by any stretch of the imagination, but I think you have to be realistic in regards to what's going to ripen well when it comes to Cab Franc.
Right.
Cab Franc,
You don't need any Christmas berries getting into your wine.
No, no. It's a variety that Merlot you can get away with cropping maybe a touch more than you should have in a growing season. Cabernet Franc you can't. If it's more than it should be, it goes from what I think is a very pretty example of the variety to a much more herbaceous green.
One of the dangers of that, yes.
Yeah, it goes from really nice to not so nice at all.
Right. Now, you've got some lovely color on this. Are you doing a cold soak? And how long do you let your fruit stay? How long do you let your wine stay on the fruit?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, once harvested, we go through a musk chiller to chill the juice down. So skins, juice, seeds hitting the ferment tank are at about 50 degrees. I'll soak for anywhere from 2.5 to 3 days. Sometimes longer, depending on the vintage, and then warm the ferment up very quickly. Try to get it up right at the beginning of ferment, warm 85, high 80s. Ferment it for about the first third of the fermentation hot, and then start cooling it down. So as that by the last third of the fermentation, it's fermenting in the 70s. To slow down the extraction from the seeds once we have alcohol in the wine. I'm not a big long soaking believer of Cabernet Franc. I think it can get a little bit too astringent too quickly. So I'd say in general, including that 3 to 4 day cold soak, 15 to maybe 22 days on skins and pressed. So not that far past dryness. Come off and into a selection of really tight grained barrels, so not to overwhelm the wine, and not a huge percentage of new barrels, maybe about 15%.
I was just about to ask. So yeah, so I noticed that it's got a very nice touch of oak, but it's not this overwhelming kind of thing. And so you're definitely using a lot of neutral to second or third year oak as opposed to a lot of new oak.
Absolutely. I think that having had a fair bit of experience with it over the last 20 plus years, I see Cabernet Franc as it's one of the Bordelais 5. I don't make it the same way as Merlot or Cabernet Sauvignon from an extraction standpoint. It's a thin skin variety, so it's more in the keeping of, to a certain extent, Sangiovese or Grenache or even Pinot Noir. You have to be a little bit gentler on the extraction. You can go too far too quickly. I think the beauty of this wine is its elegance and its soft suppleness and fruit forward character. I don't want high alcohol, which as a cool region we don't typically struggle with. This is around 13%, which is nice. It's nice and balanced. And I think the selection of oak also is trying to show off the fruit versus the tannin structure of the wine.
Right. I was going to say that the nice part here is that you really want to experience the fruit, and the fruit's coming through beautifully. I mean, there's some bright fruits in there, but there's also some dark fruits in there. And I think what you do brilliantly with your Cab Francs is do that. You're able to show both of those, and it's a beautiful wine, really is. I wanted to open it up to anybody. Any other comments or questions for Russell about this lovely Cabernet Franc? Let's see. Do we have any comments? I see some.
I just wanted to comment that for the alcohol content, it's extremely well balanced. I don't think I've had a Cabernet Franc this well put together in a while. I love it. It's quite amazing, and you don't get that heat until like the very end. So the balance is just beautiful. It's really, really pleasant.
Russell, a question from the audience. I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off, Stephen. I apologize. A question from the audience was, over this period of time that you've been making Cab Franc, have you changed your oak program? We know where you are now. Maybe where did you start, and when did you decide, hey, I'm going to change my oak program?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think it feeds to Stephen's, some of Stephen's comments as well. Less is more. So in the 94, 90, in the 90s, I had a larger percentage of new oak. It was probably up in the 25, maybe sometimes even 30% range, and also we were at Pellegrini, we were barrel aging for 2 seasons, for 2 years. So it would spend 18, 22 months in barrel. I've backed down on the quantity of new oak over the last couple of decades. It predominantly is Hungarian oak now, which is a much tighter grain wood than even the French oak, which is the same tree, just where it's grown. So it gives up a less, flavor impact, as quickly. And we've shortened up the time in barrel too. So it spends, depending on the vintage, maybe 12 months, maybe 13, 14 months, but not 18, 19, 20 months. I thought that was, those wines have aged very nicely, the Pellegrini wines, but I think this is a better expression, I think, of what we can do well.
I have to tell you, I've had some Pellegrini wines of yours that were 10 and 12 years old and just poured beautifully. So no complaints in there in any way, shape, or form. Question, do you find when you're growing Cabernet Franc that it's picky about the site where you plant it, more so than other grapes?
Yeah, I should have covered that also. Yes, I think like it wants to grow, crop more than it should. It also is less. On the North Fork of Long Island is roughly, the viticultural area is about 25 miles east-west and about 3 miles north-south. So it's this thin corridor of relatively similar topography, relative flat or flatter, and similar soil types, but there are some nuances from slight undulations from farming over the hundreds of years that have happened. And Cabernet Franc, Merlot is suited pretty well across the board anywhere on the North Fork. Cabernet Franc is definitely much more site specific. It doesn't like heavier soils. It wants to be on the lighter. It should be on the lighter soils, again, because it's more vegetative. So if it sits on more water as well as heavier soils, it wants to grow too big. So it's definitely a lot more site specific than Merlot would be.
And do you plant on a particular rootstock, or do you use the same, or do you change the rootstocks depending on the vineyard?
Yeah, again, a little bit. The beauty of the North Fork is we're a pretty compact region, so you can't drive from home to work without passing 2 or 3 vineyards or 3 or 4 wineries, or so you're constantly viewing your neighbors. Right. Positively and or negatively, seeing what's going right, what's going wrong. And there's a nice camaraderie here and sharing information. So we've all pretty well moved to devigorating, rootstocks, things that are drought stress. So I plant on 10114 or some of the rootstocks that don't find a lot of water. So to that point, we actually irrigate even in an area that gets 2 inches, ish on average every month through the growing season. It's the spell between the rain that causes issues because we have such high sand content. Some of the early plantings of Cabernet Franc were planted on SO4 and 5BB and more Californian rootstocks that need to find water. So those old vines, 40-year-old plus vines on the North Fork aren't necessarily the best because of the clones and especially the rootstock that it was planted on.
Fascinating. Well, Russell, just a great wine. Thank you so much. And up next, we have Sue from Buttonwood Grove. Hello, Sue.
Hi.
Hello.
Happy to be here.
Happy to be. No, you're not. You're like sitting there thinking about all the 20 things that are going on while you're sitting here at this conference. Don't say that.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be tasting your dry Riesling. Here it is, folks, the dry Riesling. Buttonwood Grove 2019. This is 100% Riesling from the Finger Lakes. It's a great price at $17.99. haven't mentioned the prices from the other wines, but the prices of all three so far have been very, very affordable and well within an easy range of purchase. Buttonwood's doing all kinds of stuff, but we're going to start off, Sue, first with you. How did you get into winemaking? Because you didn't start out in winemaking.
No, I didn't. I started out by picking grapes about 30 odd years ago with a bunch of women in a vineyard in the Finger Lakes before a lot of our immigrant labor moved in, and there was still local people who wanted to work. And my daughter was young then. I put her on the bus and I would go out and pick grapes. And before she came home, I would leave everyone and come back home and take her off the bus. And that's how my career started in the wine industry.
And now you've been at Buttonwood for 7 years or
I have
14
been
years?
with Buttonwood for actually over 10 years now.
Yeah.
So I was actually here with the prior owner, with
Right.
Ken and Diane, and then transitioned in. So the last 7 years I have been with Dave and Melissa since they bought Buttonwood Grove as the winemaker.
So you were in the tasting room at first, and then you slowly transitioned into the cellar.
That's
And,
correct.
And when they took over, you had a great opportunity to move into the winemaking. That's pretty awesome. That's very cool.
Yes. Yeah, it was a huge learning curve for an old lady.
Oh, no. So anyway, I'm pouring this. There's some just beautiful notes on this wine, doing my little Kevin's Rayleigh finger over the, you get a really nice whiff of that. It's a really beautiful wine. You got a little petrol in the nose. You've got some lovely green apple in there, really some lovely tropical notes. Tell us a little bit about your vineyard. You've got a very large Riesling program in that you make about 10 different Rieslings, as I recall.
Yes, we do. So our main focus is on our dry Riesling, our regular Riesling. And then we have a bunch of additional Rieslings that we do that are single vineyards for different areas. So we actually take care of another site in Skinny Atlas and make a single Riesling from there for Skinny Atlas. But the dry Riesling basically is almost all estate vineyards. That wine is brought in here. We destem it, crush it, press it, and part of it actually goes into oak for about anywhere from 4 to 6 months to give us a little more texture to our dry Riesling. Some of our dry Riesling can be a little more acidic than we want it to be, and so the barrel aging of about 10% really helps with the structure of the wine. We quite enjoy that piece of it. We do a barrel aged Riesling also, the Francis Amelia. So
A
that
lovely wine. That Francis Amelia is a lovely wine. With that Francis Amelia, if I may interrupt for just one moment, do you, again, I'm going to ask about the wood. Do you use older wood or a combination of new and old?
we use all older wood, all neutral wood.
It's
Yeah,
really
we
fruit forward,
still-
and it's just, but it's a lovely wine.
Yeah, spends extra time on the lees, gets some extra stirring in the barrels to help again with all that texture.
Yeah, it's got a big mouthfeel. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I really wanted to call that wine out for you because that's a really very special wine. So I know you
Thank
don't do a lot of it, so it's hard. It's a little harder to get, but it's a fabulous wine. So with this Riesling, with this dry Riesling, I interrupted, so I apologize. When you cellar this, is there any oak in this one?
So yes, there is. There's almost 10% oak in this one. Yeah.
And again, is it newer, older combination?
Again, all neutral. So it tends to be whatever we don't want to put into the Francis Amelia, we put back into the dry Riesling to help balance out those flavors.
And when you're, so you're right near the water.
We're right near Cayuga Lake. Yes, we are. Yeah.
So,
we
and
get,
how does that make for, during the season? I mean, or do you have to remove a lot of fruit when you're growing Riesling? How growing Riesling is different from growing Cabernet Franc. So I want to sort of get a sense from you of like what that's about.
so no, we do not. So we do leaf removal so that we get extra sunshine in there. We can get more air movement through. All of our vines are on VSP, again, so that we can control where the fruit zone is and get that air and open up the canopy in that middle zone. So that helps a lot for our Riesling. Allows for it to dry off quickly, so we don't have too much problem with botrytis and other rot issues that can creep in at this time of the year. And to be honest with you, those Rieslings this year are looking like Chardonnay Rieslings because we had so much rain.
Yeah, it was a tough season. Parts of it were very tough. With this though, it's beautiful. You've got some really ripe fruits here. You've got some tropical notes. There's some lemon zest to it. I mean, it's just a really spectacular dry Riesling.
Well, the 2019 season was a beautiful season too. Lots of sunshine, was just gorgeous that way. Yeah.
I know Stephen.
Oh, Stephen has Chardonnay. Lucky fella.
It's beautiful. I wish I did get that Riesling.
Sorry.
It's quite all right.
Do you now? When was this bottled?
So this was bottled almost a year ago at
So you
this
let
point. Yeah,
Right.
we tried to bottle in the early spring. And so, yes, this was quite a bit of wine that year. And so we're still selling the 2019. The 2020 is currently in bottle and waiting to be released.
So somebody said they would enjoy this as a Thanksgiving aperitif with some crab cakes. So I do think
Ooh.
that'd be, it's lip smacking. It would go great with cheese, seafood. I mean, there's just some lovely, lovely things that are going on with this wine. It's just got a great mouthfeel. Really, the fruit lingers and lingers on this one just beautifully. It's very lively. The acidity keeps it dancing on the tongue.
Thank you.
Do any of our winemakers have any questions or thoughts they want to share about the dry Riesling? So, Sue, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your program? Why don't you tell us about some of the other Rieslings that you're making? Because this is a big calling card for your winery.
Right. So we do some sweeter Rieslings. The big hollow block is traditionally a sweeter Riesling on our wine list. We have over the years done an ice wine out of the Reamer block. We do a specific Reamer block, also Riesling. Some years it all kind of depends.
What is the Reamer's block? Why don't you explain what the Reamer's block is?
So the Reamer block was planted by the prior owner. The original owner of the winery. He planted the acreage out in front of our winery, about 10 acres out front. Dave has since filled out most of the acreage that was available for planting. So more Rieslings, more diversity, a little more Sauvignon Blanc, a lot more Cab Franc. Again, one of our wines, our favorite grapes is the Cab Franc. We find that there's a lot that can be done with Cab Franc in our region. We also do a lot of fun little things with pet nats, forced carbonation with Rieslings. They just allow themselves to go in a lot of different directions.
What about the Reamers? Why that particular vineyard? Is there a particular flavor profile or texture that comes out of there that you guys do that?
So older vineyard, So much more interesting structure to the fruit flavors later on in development. We tend to take each vineyard and put it in a separate tank, actually do something different with each one to a different degree of sweetness, a different yeast profile. And then all of the yeast are all the wines are then blended differently as for each year, depending on what we get from the season.
And what were some of the other Rieslings that you were producing in your Riesling program?
So we do Skinny Atlas Riesling. We do Tank Select Riesling, which could be from multiple sources. The Big Hollow Riesling, again, is a specific vineyard, as is the Riemer Riesling. The Francis Amelia is our barreled Riesling, as well as the dry, the regular Riesling, an ice wine, and a pet nat.
Pet nat. So tell us a little bit about your pet nat, because pet nats are very popular these days. Tell us a little bit about your pet nat.
So pet nats are obviously a lot of fun to make. They're quick turnaround. We bring them in September. Quite often we're heading for bottle by November with a Riesling. This year we're also making a pet nat with a melody, which should be ready to bottle right in the middle of harvesting Riesling. So that will make life interesting. But we always like a challenge around here. So yeah,
nothing worse than bottling in the middle of harvest.
People find them quite refreshing. They're light. They're fun for any time. They're easy to open and drink.
When you bottle your pet nat, are you disgorging or you're going sauvage? I believe the term is sauvage.
Sauvage is the way we go.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah,
We need a t-shirt for sauvage. There you go. And you do it a sparkling.
Yes. Yeah. We do a forced carbonated sparkling. We have not gone for a traditional sparkling with Riesling yet. That is something down the road that we hope to add to the list.
Fascinating. Fascinating. Well, it's a great program you guys are doing, and the wines are really spectacular. And I love a number of the other Rieslings. Was there anything else you wanted to say about what you guys are doing over at Buttonwood Grove?
So since Dave has taken over, he has been very focused on our Cab Franc program. You can see in the background that we have a variety of different size formats for barreling our Cab Franc. So we have a large cask that you might be able to see right behind me. That's about 1,300 gallons. We have some Percherons on the other side of me here that are about 600 liters. So all of that goes into our oak program. And then
a lot of big oak there.
Yeah, do a rosé with our Cab Franc, and also we produce a Blanc de Franc, which is actually a white wine. That's kind of fun for the summer.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Well, I thank you very much. You are fantastic. And now we are on to Stephen. Stephen Fulkerson from Fulkerson Winery. Stephen, why don't you tell us a little bit about your family's background and your background?
So the family actually made it to the continent in 1618. We used to own the 2 blocks from Wall Street to Maiden Lane, just north of the wall. From there, New Jersey, then Newtown, which is now Elmira, New York, and then moved up to our current location in 1805, where we were a sustenance farm until just actually probably around the Depression. We had raspberries until the blight came through in the 50s, started growing grapes for Taylor, and then Coca-Cola and Seagram's came in, and we started growing our own having our own wines in about 1989, 10 years after we opened a juice plant selling fresh grape juice to home winemakers. 1988, hailstorm, devastated most of our crop. Luckily, with the juice plant, we were able to buy other people's wine grapes, where we then made wine, just 1,000 cases, 4 different varieties. Now we're 30 plus, 9 Rieslings, including this tequila barrel aged. We have other growers. We grow ourselves. We sell to home winemakers still. It's a fun and interesting thing. I envy all the winemakers that just get to focus on their own programs. But yeah, that's us in a nutshell.
I'm going to ask you first off, this is a fascinating wine. This is your Riesling aged in a tequila barrel. And this is from the 2020 vintage. It's a 100% Riesling from Seneca Lake. And you've done some really innovative wines. You've got sort of the classic grouping, but then you've done some bourbon barrel aged, tequila barrel aged. You've been working with some unique grapes that not a lot of other wineries have. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to there at Fulkerson.
A lot of what we do here kind of centers around the versatility in wine and winemaking, Riesling especially. This with our barrel program and specifically the tequila and the bourbon age, what we go for is less barrel character, but a little bit of a nuance on the back end. So this is relatively young. It was bottled, I think, 2 months ago. So the oak is still relatively fresh on the palate. And so you can, in the nose, there's a lot of that oak. A little bit of the tequila. And what we want is that agave finish. We don't want it to be hot. We want that Riesling character to really kind of shine through, but then have a nice little unique finish. This wine was selected for this panel mainly because we really kind of love experimentation, and I think New York, if there's one state that you can really kind of shine in experimentation, it's New York. Our next wine, which is a dry diamond, that's another great variety that is experimented with in this state, and you don't find it much else. We do things with Albarino. We've got a couple rows that we baby through the winters. We do Sauvignon Blanc.
How hard is it to grow Albarino where you are?
It's very hard. We have to bury vines every year. So we have a lot of bud loss due to actually burying them. So insects in the soil themselves, that we have a decent amount of bud loss due to cold injury. We get about 70 cases a year of that. We're contracting with another grower down the street for Zweigelt. We grow Dorn Felder.
Zweigelt is spectacular. Tell us a little bit about Zweigelt and what you're going to be doing with that in the future.
So Zweigelt, the grower is actually retiring. So we're not 100% sure on the future of that program, but I'm hoping that we can continue to at least convince him to let us take care of him.
How about the Dorn Felder? How's that doing for you?
So Dorn Felder is an interesting variety. So when we started growing Dorn Felder, we actually, if you come to our winery, the vines growing up the side of the building are Dorn Felder. It gets about a quarter of our crop right from the building. After we started that program by oak aging that for about 12 months and then bottling it as an aged red. But I actually had a few German Airbnb guests, and I asked them, what do you think about Dorn Felder? And they answered, well, we don't think about Dorn Felder. And so after a lengthy conversation about it, they're like, well, you should, try it this way. So we started putting it into a nouveau style. It usually gets bottled in December, and we've tripled sales since doing that. So it really fresh, fruit forward, almost Beaujolais in that program.
Fascinating, fascinating.
No oak, all stainless.
So now let's talk about this Riesling. Firstly, the Riesling comes from your own farm, I'm assuming.
There's we have our main Riesling block, which is about 6 acres. There's over 5 miles of tile in that block. The picture on screen right now is our main facility, and the Riesling is actually just off camera to the left. Below the main highway there is all alluvial sediment from the stream that's just south of us, from the ancient Lake Newberry. And so as you get further north, you get heavier and heavier soil. And this is actually from one of our heaviest soil. That's our Riesling block there. One of the heaviest soils that we have in the Finger Lakes. So super clay from sediment from the big stream just south of us, which gives it a super mineral character, which is why we chose that for this program. It is definitely a unique wine. It's definitely not for everybody, but I'm proud of it and I really enjoy it. The one problem with this vintage, the 2020, is a day open and this does fall apart, but it's beautiful, fresh.
So do you make this wine any differently, thinking that you're going to put this in a tequila barrel from some of your other Riesling, or are we just taking a portion of the Riesling and putting it in a barrel?
We haven't treated it differently yet, but I think that depending on the availability of tequila barrels and how good they are, we'll probably start thinking about that as well. About a third of our production goes to our own wine, and then the other 2/3 are for custom and home winemakers. So we do have a lot of time restraints, especially with the current staff shortages that I think everybody's dealing with.
Yeah. So my question, I guess, then is, once you've made the Riesling, are you aging it in barrel, or are you working on it in a stainless steel and then finishing it in the tequila barrel?
Yes, it's finished in the tequila barrels. We test every 2 to 3 weeks to make sure that that we don't go too far on it. And I believe that this was just over 4 months.
4 months.
And our first vintage was about
tequila. 6. Are you at liberty to say whose tequila barrels they are or not? I don't remember from the
So
list.
unfortunately, they're unmarked. I'm not sure whose. So they're Bordeaux, they're red wine Bordeaux bottle or barrels that have been reused for tequila and then shipped back to the States.
So there was a reposado. Maybe.
So
interesting. Right, it was obviously a reposado. Fabulous. Well, it's got a.
And then everybody should have also gotten a bottle of Riesling pasteurized grape juice, which was the same block and vintage as.
Tell us a little bit about this, because you were having some fun before it all started. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So we used to do grape juice as our main business, and we used to do pasteurized grape juice through Seneca Foods when it was in Dundee, New York. But when they moved their juice production out to Michigan, we lost that co-packer and haven't done it since. 2 years ago, a client came to me asking for grape juice, and I got HACCP certified and bought the equipment and started doing that. Now we're up to 12 varieties of grapes, 2 apple varieties, and it's about 15% of our total volume.
Wow, fascinating, fascinating. And now, is that these bottles are available to consumers as well as bulk juice to other co-packers?
Yes.
Very cool. And how many? And there's some sediment in there, so this is the real deal. This is not.
Yeah. So we filter. We use flotation to filter that juice, and then it is. It's cold stabilized as much as we possibly can get it in the couple of days that I have, or it gets frozen and then brought back. And then it's heated to 190 degrees and it's put in the bottle, and that's it. There's no other preservatives. It's just 100% unadulterated grape juice and heat.
There you go. There you go. So now tell us a little bit about yourself. You went to Cornell, I believe. Am I right?
I went to Cornell. I was the first official person through their new viticulture and enology program. I was the guinea pig. It's great when you go in to your advisor's office the semester after you almost failed out of school and said, hey, guess what class you didn't have to take last season? If you say organic chem. After college, I came to the winery for a few years, and then I got back together with who's now my wife, Regina. She was pursuing a PhD in medical physics in Wisconsin. So I ended up out there for 3 years, got a lot of my marketing and I'll say retail experience at REI in Madison, Wisconsin, Recreational Equipment Inc. And then ended up back out here in 2011. Joined the winery ownership team in 2013, became GM in 2015, and expanded the juice in 2019.
Because you grew up in Connecticut, is that right?
No, I grew up on the farm.
Oh, you did? You grew up on the farm?
Yep.
Okay.
I got my start, with a rake and, being inside the manure spreader with all the skins off the press line and, making sure as many of that manure spreader as we could.
So glamorous. The first question that I've got here from the world out there from Len Thompson is, you're using tequila barrels and bourbon barrels. Is this something that you want to be known, is what Fulkerson to be known for? Or is this some experimentation?
That's a great question. I think the experimental aspect of our program, I think, is more what we want to be known for, and creating some really unique wines that are well balanced. I think that will speak for the rest of our program as well. So.
And his other question was, is this made with hard pressed Riesling?
So it is whole. It is whole fractions. So we do mix fractions, and so I think the yield on this was around 185 gallons per ton after flotation.
All right. And a good question is, it's got some lovely flavors. As much as it's lovely to drink, there's also something in me calling out to say, gosh, you could make a pretty darn good cocktail with this as well as with your grape juice. Is that something you've thought of as well?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we're looking forward to coming next year in the tasting room is to have an extra section that we can open up for kind of wine-based cocktails and more of just a lounge area. And I think that that's something that is definitely up and coming, especially with the millennial generation and that experimentation. There's a lot of really unique wine-based cocktails out there that are really fun to drink, and nobody really talks about them.
It does seem to me that this would also go beautifully with certain spicy foods as well. Am I off the base there?
Oh no, it's amazing with Thai.
It's amazing with Thai.
Thai foods, oh my gosh, yeah. Just don't order Thai hot or else you won't taste anything for 3 weeks.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. And then next up is Sydney West from
Russell, did you have a question?
Sure.
I just have actually one comment. I haven't had this wine before. I had sort of no predisposed idea of what it would come across like. I'm not a big oak guy. I'm very surprised and impressed with the nuance on the finish. But what hit me initially, and I just kept going back to it, I just get on the finish, I get white chocolate.
Oh, interesting.
I just kept going back thinking, am I off base? But it just keeps coming through and coming through. It's a very nice finish.
Yeah.
I get it there. Wow.
I think the smokiness.
Oh my God. Wow. Yeah, that creaminess.
Yeah, there's that creaminess. Yeah, that's I'm getting that creaminess now that he's called that out. It's a very good point.
Wow, that is really unique. Thanks, Russell. That's a great observation. Thank you.
Keep it up.
Any other observations or questions for Stephen? Going once, going twice. Okay, and now we're.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. And then we're going to transition over to Cindy for Black Willow Winery, and we're going to talk about their diamond. Is that? Oh, you know, a little too much shine there. There you go.
Classic.
So our Black Willow winery has produced this classic diamond. This is the 2019 version. This is 100% New York State diamond. Diamond's not a well-known grape, and yet to winemakers, especially in the Finger Lakes, it is actually well-known. It's been usually used as a blender, but I have to say Black Willow has a way with diamond. And I think this is actually, between this one and their dry version, they make two of the best diamond varietal wines in the industry. So I'm going to turn it on over to Cindy. Cindy, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So tell us a little bit about first yourself. Tell us about Black Willow, how you came to be there, and then we'll move on to the next questions after that.
Okay, yeah. I actually had a life experience happen, a very sad one that happened to me in 2004. And rather than letting it keep me down, I decided to live my dream in honor of the one lost and go to school and become a winemaker. I've always loved wine. I was in the technology industry for 15 years as a market development manager for software companies. And I would travel all over doing seminars, even in London, England. I've been to China. I've been, I worked for a software company out of Seattle, Washington for a year. And so I really got to see how diverse the wine industry is, because most people just think about Chardonnay, Cabernet, Riesling, just the general typical varietals that everybody knows about. And then when I decided to make a career change, I always tell people I used to make money, now I make wine. And we all know that's true, right?
Oh, wow.
So I went to school part-time through the VESTA program, which is the Viticulture, Enology, Science, Technology Alliance, which allowed me to go part-time and work still. Everything was online. And then I had so many hands-on hours at each class to take. And I traveled all over the USA for each of those classes to do my hands-on. And then I interned at 3 local wineries here in the Niagara region for a year in 2008 to 9, right from pruning in the vineyard to, harvesting and bottling. And it was a very good experience.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about you're in the Niagara escarpment, correct?
Yes. Yep. Well, I'm actually not considered this escarpment. I'm right on Lake Ontario. I'm on the South Shore of Lake Ontario in the USA side. So the escarpment is just a little south of me. We don't have our own AVA yet. I know we're working on it because the soils are totally different here. The soils are all sandy loam, which makes it really nice for growing. My particular piece of property, I have 45 acres right on the lake. Lake Ontario. It has a drainage ditch going diagonally through the property. It has drainage tile. It used to be a fruit farm. We still have some cherry trees on it, but we planted our first vineyard back in 2015. And the 19 was our first harvest that we were able to do of my diamond grapes to use for winemaking.
All right. So now tell me, why did you choose diamond?
Well, I have very little experience in viticulture, and there's not a lot of people in my region that grow the diamond grapes. I know in the Finger Lakes there are a lot more, but not in the Niagara region. It grows pretty quickly, and it's cold hardy, and it's hard to kill it. So I wanted to have something that I would be successful with and that I could use in a pretty quick turnaround time for winemaking.
And how long have you owned Black Willow at this point?
We were established in, it says on the paper 2009, but it was actually 2010 December. So it'll be 11 years in December that I've been open.
Fantastic, fantastic. So tell me a little bit about growing diamond. As you said, it's one of the things I used to joke about with Baco Noir was I grew it because not only would it survive the winter, but it would survive me. But you're making some lovely varietal wines out of this grape, which really nobody else. I mean, I can only think of 1 or 2 wineries that even offer a varietal diamond. How did you come to decide doing that instead of blending it? Because a lot of times it's used for blending.
because I think it's an absolute lovely grape. It's a crossbreed between the Concord and the Iona. So you get the grapiness, and sometimes you can get a little petrol or foxiness from the Concord up part of it, but mostly then you get the floral and the acidity from the Iona. So it just is so paired so nicely. So if you, most people do make it a sweeter version, which I chose this time because the last time I spoke with you, we did the estate diamond, which is absolutely lovely. And that's just from this harvest 2 weeks ago, those grapes right there in the picture. So I find that as long as you can balance the sweetness and the acidity level, it's an absolute, gem. It's, people say, oh, I love a Moscato, but they love this even more because it has a lot more complexity to it. And it doesn't finish out flat. It has that clean finish on the palate.
Well, I mean, you just covered a couple of the things that I really wanted to say, which was one, if you like Moscato, you're going to like this diamond. There's no question about it. It's got that big sort of Moscato type nose to it. And again, you've kept the acidity at a very nice point where it does not become cloying and just too sickeningly sweet. It's got a lovely balance, and it makes it for a very easy drinker. So
I find I call it juicy. It's juicy.
Oh, it's big and juicy.
Not very
and
technical, but
aromatic.
I call it juicy.
It wafts out of the glass. With a lot of wines, I do the old Kevin's Railing like this, but this is just so big and in your face. It just comes wafting over. And for anybody who hasn't had the dry Willow diamond, it's something you definitely want to try because it's just a shocking wine with this big nose, and you think it's going to be super sweet, and it's actually a very elegant, great dry wine. So huge fan of that wine as well. But this has got its own lovely attributes as well. You've got all that big grapiness to it, but you've got some lovely tropical notes at the end too. And so it's got a lovely mouth feel, really pretty. So when you're making this, how hard is this to make a diamond? It's easy to grow, or it's easier to grow. It's never easy to grow grapes.
Very vigorous to grow. Yeah, we do leaf thinning and crop thinning on it because it grows quite a bit. I mean, it was shocking the second year that the vines were, planted. They had a lot of fruit on them. But to make it, we hand pick everything. We hand pick it all. And then we press it, immediately. And then I work on it within 24 hours to start the fermentation on it. And I try and keep it cool for the first part of the fermentation. And once it hits lag phase, then I let it warm a little bit more. But it's a very forgiving grape. So it has its own attributes. And I've not been doing this a very long time compared to most of you. So, I kind of trial by error on that.
So my first question to you is this straight from the press, or do you let any portion of it sit on the skins, or this is just straight to juice?
No, I do let it sit on the skins. Yeah, I do let it sit a little bit. When I make the drier version, I do let it sit on the skins and on the leaves for a bit. I do everything in stainless steel. I don't oak any of it. I don't think it needs it. It has enough complexity on its own that doesn't need any kind of oak, and I don't let the alcohol levels get too high so it doesn't have a heat to it, a burn at the end. So that's, yeah.
And do you, now I'm going to ask you, what do you serve your diamond with? What foods do you like to eat it with?
Well, it goes delicious with a nice caramel apple baked brie. And it goes great with chicken wings, Thai food, anything spicy, curry. It goes good with quite a few different types of cuisine.
Oh, now I have to tell you, I have come across a great question here. Have you ever made sparkling diamond? This seems like it might be a great pet nat or even a Charmat. I think that's a great question.
It so happens that I'm working on one, so
aha,
it's a little secret that I'm working on.
The truth.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
So are you making a pet nat, a sparkler? How are you going to handle that?
Probably the pet nat.
Wow, very cool. Very cool.
It just seems to be the thing right now. I'm going to do a couple of different types just in small batches to try it out and see what seems to go the best. So I just like to play around.
The spark, the acidity on this wine really keeps it very sort of honest and fresh instead of just being cloying it over the top. It's a really, really lovely wine. What are some of the other things so you're working on a pet nat? Any other wines you want to tell us about in your program?
Well, we just did the Van Gogh exhibit is a big thing that's going around the country right now. And I was asked to create a wine specifically for the Van Gogh Buffalo exhibit. And they gave me rights to the label. So I just did a dry blended red with that for that. And it's going over quite well. It turned out very nice. It's a Cabernet Sauvignon Marshall Foch and Chancellor with a light Hungarian oak to it. So it's very, very light in tannins, very well balanced, a lot of cherry characters to it. And then I've got, I'm working on a couple of new meads because I make the mead as well. I've been doing that since I started. It was just, I wanted something to set me apart from other wineries in the area. Nobody else had done it. So I treat my meads more like a high-end white wine. I don't use a heavier yeast. I use a very delicate yeast on it. So it's very, I have to be careful that it doesn't stick in fermentation, midway, but that was a big learning experience with the polysaccharides and the proteins and the honey, from what the bees eat. It was a whole different experience.
More complex than people think.
Right. So I'm working on a sparkling mead as well. So that, and then I'm just trying to keep up with like the shortage. I do everything here. I work in the tasting room. I wine make. I hire. I'm HR. I'm accounts payable, accounts receivable. So I just try and do the best I can with the wines that I do have and keep it consistent. But the estate diamond, like you said, is one of my, was a grand experiment that I did, because most people do take the diamond and they make it sweet. But my estate diamond is more like a Pinot Grigio Sauvignon Blanc finish with a little.
It's a spectacular wine. It's a shocker of, I have to tell you, when we did this last year and we poured that wine, I was just blown away by it. It was a really fabulous wine.
And I just didn't want to repeat that. I wanted to showcase a nice sweeter wine for New York State as well, to show the grape. So to see how nice it could be even as a sweet version.
Well, it seems to me like this too could easily be a lovely cheese wine, great for the holidays, that kind of thing, where you could be serving it in a number of different ways.
Goes great with a smoked cheese, like a smoked cheddar. We do wine and chocolate pairings here every day, wine and cheese pairings with Amish cheese, and it goes amazing with the smoked cheddar.
Anybody have any questions for Cindy? We had a lovely note from Len Thompson. He's always chatting. He was saying that it's got some lovely sweetness to it, but in the end, it really is a lovely drinking wine. So it was a really very nice.
Cindy, I think a forced carbonation, maybe like 2 atmospheres. Just when you were talking about Moscato earlier, just have a little bit of bubbly there. It might work very, very nicely with this one.
I agree completely. I agree completely. I think this could be a super winner as a sparkling wine, no question about it. Is Diamond your best selling of all? Is that what you make the most of? And is it your best selling?
Well, the Diamond grape is what I use for 3 of my wines: the Estate Diamond, the Classic Diamond, which is the one you're tasting, and then a Depeche Meow, which is my peach infused sweeter wine as well. They all sell very well. It's not my biggest selling one, which I never in a million years wanted to become known for this, but it is. It is what it is. It's called Black Widowberry. It's a Concord and Blackberry. It's crazy. It sells like crazy.
Well, your 2 diamonds are really the dry, the estate dry, and this one are both really excellent wines. And I agree completely with Russell. I think just a slight bit of carbonation there, and you've got yourself just a Moscato-like world beater, no question about it. I'm going to try to see if there's any other questions out there from our viewers. One of the ones that was out there was for Russell that I missed. What foods do you most enjoy with your Cab Franc?
Say that one more time, sorry.
What are some of the foods that you prefer to eat with your Cab Franc?
Yeah, that's sort of the beauty of Cab Franc, that although it's a red, you don't need it. You don't need it with meat. I think it goes well with sort of heavier fish, tuna, even salmon. turkey, some nice poultry that way. It doesn't need the big steak, and so I think it's a much more flexible variety that way. So I almost never drink it with red meat. It's either a heavier fish or poultry.
Got it. Fabulous. And then the other question was, what characteristics do your planting characteristics impart to your wines that make them so distinctive? That's a tough question.
I mean, it's a combination of a whole bundle of things. Obviously, you want to have a very good site. When it comes to Cabernet Franc, there's a selection of clones that I think have expressed themselves to be the better selections. 327, 214. They're these Ontav clones that were released out of Bordeaux a number of years ago. I think we talked a little bit about the selection of rootstock, trying to have a drought-sensitive rootstock so as to devigorate the vine, to put more energy into the ripening of the fruit versus the vegetative growth of the vine. So it's a combination of a whole bundle of things in the vineyard for sure. I think being honest about how much crop you should carry each vintage, and again, I'm not a believer in less is more when it comes to fruit, but too much in Cabernet Franc is a mistake.
I agree 100%. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make are trying to push their Cab Franc a little too hard, and I find that that's when you get some of the less pleasant flavors, etc., that go on with Cab Franc. And you've done just a tremendous and masterful job with Cab Franc. You really have.
Thank you very much.
If I could piggyback off that question, I'm just curious about what kind of planting density you find works well for your Cab Francs on Long Island. Is it you have sandy soil, so I'm not sure what the fertility is like of your soil there.
Yeah. Pretty well everyone's moved. I mean, the original plantings were all like 9x8 down here, because that was sort of like the classic spacing.
It's the old-fashioned one, yeah.
Yeah, and everyone's moved to either 7-foot rows or 8-foot rows, and that's a choice. I think the vine density in the row is the important part when it comes to different varieties. I think Merlot is 4 or 5 feet, in the row. Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Verdot, I think needs to be tighter to carry less fruit per vine, so like 4 feet. Cabernet Franc needs to be, because it's more vegetative. I think for me the perfect one is 7x6 or 8x6.
Huh.
It needs to be a little bit further apart because it's going to grow too vegetative no matter what. So we do space it out a bit more.
Huh, interesting. Sue, you were laughing. I'm assuming your Riesling is planted in the old-fashioned 9x8 or thereabouts.
Yes.
My question for you is, the new vineyards that you've planted, have you planted tighter or not?
No, we haven't, because again, the vines are still growing rather large, so it's better for them to have spacing to do that. The new vineyards that we bought over at 680 Cellars are spaced very close. And there's will be some experimentation done over the years to see whether or not to keep them that close.
Well, that certainly seems to be the theme on some of, especially the red wines, which is to closer spacing, less fruit per vine. But
Right.
The idea is that the vine focuses on that lesser fruit to get a riper berry. Stephen, are you doing any of that? Are you doing any new plantings, and are you changing some of the styles in which you're planting?
I'm trying to rein in planting. We have 110 acres. We utilize about 30 of it on like in-house. So, but we find, Cabernet Franc, we've been on the 8x5, 8x6, and we haven't gone too much lower than that. I know I've planted a lot of vineyards in the area, and I think the tightest that I've seen with Cabernet Franc is 8 by 3, 8 by a meter.
Yeah.
So, And those are currently under biodynamic, where they're that tight. So I agree with the vegetative characteristics there. It's going to grow whether you have it tight or not. And you do need to let it kind of sprawl out.
I was going to say, you can only prune so much, and it's kind of a losing battle in some ways.
Our newest Cabernet Franc is actually, we utilize umbrella training for them.
And how's that working so far? Are you happy with that?
Very well. Very well. I'm quite happy with how those are worked out. It's actually our cleanest block.
And how about you, Cindy, is with your diamond, I know it grows rather easily or it grows well for you. How are you planted and on any of the newer plantings, have you gone to a tighter planting?
Not at this time, but next planting, we're going to be doing some vinifera to test because we are so close to the lake, and Lake Ontario is so large and so deep, it doesn't freeze over. So I'm going to just do a few rows and one block of a bunch of different varietals just as a test to see what works, so that I can carry on from there. As we have beautiful piece of property here, and I just want to utilize all this soil that we have and the drainage and everything.
So Russell, you work with a number of different growers and wineries. You have a very unique view on what's going on, especially on the island. Are you seeing that a lot of vineyards are being planted much more tightly when it comes to some of the vinifera vines?
Yeah, I think once again, I think in the 80s, 70s, 80s. Everything was 9x8. Then people started experimenting with different, densities. Some of the vineyards went all the way down to 6x3, too tight, too close. More from a humidity and a lack of air movement. It just gets too dense in there. It didn't devigorate the vines. So I think that we pretty well settled on that 7 or 8 foot row choice. That's more of an equipment selection.
Right.
Finger Lakes, obviously land pricing is different than it is on Long Island. So 7, 8, 9 is a choice, and it's more of an economics when it comes to land pricing. So we want to try to maximize our yield in many respects. The in the row spacing, I think, is the quality choice, and that's. I think people are settling. No one's going further than 6 feet apart, no matter what the variety is now. So it's anywhere from 3 to 6, and I would say that the majority of the varieties are in that 4 to 6 foot range. So 7 by 6, I think is 7 by 4 is like 1,550 vines per acre. 7 by 6 is like 1,200 and something vines per acre. I think that's a pretty good number for us, that we're seeing.
We have a wine geek out there who wants to know, how many buds do you leave at pruning on a Cabernet Franc? I know that's a fun question. I can't lie. Although when you're out there in February pruning, you're like, F this, F that. Your language is a little colorful, I'm sure.
Yeah. I try where possible to spur prune or cordon prune, Cabernet Franc. A number of reds where possible. So we're typically leaving a 2-bud spur, every 8 inches, and then coming back through the season and seeing what the fruitfulness of the shoots are, to whether we remove shoots. So depending on some of the history of that particular block, it may end up being a 1-bud spur, 2-bud, 1-bud, 2-bud. We know we're going to get more than enough vegetative growth. So over a 6 foot cordon, obviously every 8 inches, so 72. So you can sort of divide that down, and it's 9. So you've got potential of 18 buds per vine, which can give you 3 clusters per bud. So that's more than enough. Normally we'll thin down to no more than 2.
Number one, we're coming out of time. Does anybody else have anything else to add to this conversation? Stephen or Edward or Sue about the early bud? How many buds do you leave, or your pruning practices?
So ours are all VSP. So there are 4 canes that are left in a that are put on the new canes every year. So we do very little spur pruning for ours. Ours is all about cane pruning.
And Stephen, any particular thoughts on this subject? No.
Yeah, I mean, so different blocks are going to produce some different things. We have a really unique situation where we're on an ancient river delta. So we have, 9 different soils within a quarter mile. We have Riesling on each one of those soils, and we do treat them a little bit differently. As Russell was stating, I don't think I've seen any vineyard planted less than 8x6. 8x6 is about the least dense that you'll find these days. And the VSP, works really well. Really vigorous varieties. Dorn Felder will throw a 30-foot bull cane. You need to kind of deal with that as the season goes, or leave more, buds so that it'll kind of devigorate the vine. So I think that everybody's pretty much covered it, but with different soils, you do have to treat them differently. But for the most part, you can get away with a pretty standard program.
All right, well, we're running out of time, so I just want to say thank you to all of you for participating in this. These wines were tremendous, and again, in keeping with the theme of the broadcast, or whatever you want to call this, in here we've got such incredibly diverse wines, and yet each one of these are immensely drinkable and perfect for the holidays. This is a great time to get them sparkling, to get some Cab Franc. You need a Moscato style wine, and Riesling. What Riesling doesn't go with turkey and the holidays? So I can't say enough about this panel. I think we've had some great fun, and it does show what New York makes, and I think the diversity of it is really the fun of what we've been able to discuss. So guys, I thank you so much, and I hope you have a great end of year and a great harvest. I hope many of you don't snap at too many people during the course of the next couple of months.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Get back to work.
Bye now.
Thanks to all of you for attending, and to Carlo, Sue, Cynthia, Edward, Stephen, and Russell for a terrific session. As a reminder, we hope you will join us for our next upcoming event, which should open the conversation into a very pertinent topic, Wine Growers, the Foundation of Sustainability, on Monday, October 25th at 4:00 p.m. with Esther Mobley. Thank you again, and have a great evening.